In 1997, a rancher was walking across what should have been a river. 8 years of drought had turned that waterway into nothing but rocks and sand. But when he looked down, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The roof of a blue Chevrolet Suburban. And inside it, there was something that no one should have found that way. You're about to hear one of the most disturbing stories from Arizona. An entire family that vanished without a trace during their 1989 summer vacation, only to be found when nature decided to reveal its secrets. Get ready, because this story will mess with your head in ways you can't imagine. If you love real unsolved mysteries, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because every week I bring you cases that will keep you thinking for days. I've spent the last 5 years investigating this case, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what happened to the Wallace family in 1989 defies everything we think we know about reality. I've interviewed over 100 people, analyzed thousands of documents, and traveled to places that most people wouldn't dare visit. What I discovered isn't just a missing persons case, it's evidence that our world is far stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined. This is the story of how an ordinary family took a vacation and stepped into a nightmare that's still unfolding today, 35 years later. And by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why some mysteries are meant to stay buried. The Wallace family lived the American dream in 1989 Tucson. Richard Wallace, 42, was a civil engineer who specialized in underground construction projects. His colleagues described him as meticulous, the kind of man who triple-checked every calculation and always had backup plans for his backup plans. Susan Wallace, 39, taught 3rd grade at Desert Hills Elementary, where she was beloved by students and parents alike. She had a remarkable ability to calm anxious children and could spot trouble from across a playground. The twins, Jennifer and Michael, had just turned 16 and were everything their parents had hoped for. Honor students, athletes, popular, but not arrogant. Jennifer wanted to be a veterinarian and spent her free time volunteering at animal shelters. Michael was fascinated by astronomy and had built his own telescope in the garage. They lived in a modest 2-story house on Saguaro Street, where Richard maintained a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood, and Susan hosted weekly book clubs that often ran late into the evening. Neighbors universally described them as the family everyone wanted to be. Close-knit, happy, completely normal. But normality, I've learned, offers no protection against the impossible. July 1989 brought one of the most brutal heat waves in Arizona history. Temperatures soared above 120 degrees for 12 consecutive days, melting asphalt and causing power grids to fail across the state. The Wallace house, like most in Tucson, became unbearable despite running air conditioning constantly. Richard had been tracking the heat wave obsessively, studying weather patterns and topographical maps, when he remembered something his college roommate had mentioned years earlier. There was a place in the mountains, a hidden canyon, where the elevation created a natural cooling effect. His friend had inherited a cabin there from his grandfather, but rarely used it. When Richard called to ask about borrowing it for a week, his friend seemed almost relieved. "Take it as long as you want," he said. "Honestly, that place gives me the creeps. Too quiet, too isolated. My grandfather used to say strange things about it, but I figured it was just old age talking." Richard should have paid attention to that warning. Instead, he saw it as the perfect escape from the oppressive heat and the perfect opportunity to reconnect with his family away from the distractions of modern life. He spent days planning the trip, creating detailed itineraries, packing lists, emergency supplies. He even laminated a hand-drawn map showing the route to the cabin, complete with landmarks and GPS coordinates. The cabin sat in what locals called Whisper Canyon, a name that originated from the Tohono O'odham tribe, who had considered the area sacred and dangerous for centuries. The canyon was a geological anomaly, carved not by water, but by some unknown force that had left perfectly smooth walls stretching up toward the sky. The cabin itself was a simple structure built in the 1940s by a mining company as a survey station, later converted to a hunting lodge, then finally abandoned until Richard's friend's grandfather purchased it in the 1970s. It had 2 small bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchenette, and a bathroom connected to a well that tapped into an underground spring. There was no electricity, no phone service, no television or radio reception. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, the nearest town 25 miles. Cell phone coverage didn't exist in 1989, and even if it had, the canyon's unique geology would have blocked most signals. It was, Richard told his family excitedly, the perfect place to unplug from the world and remember what really matters. The irony of that statement would haunt investigators for decades. Richard had meticulously planned their route, marking gas stations, rest stops, even scenic overlooks where they could stretch their legs. He'd calculated drive times, accounting for the mountain roads and their heavy-loaded Suburban. Everything was perfect, organized, thought through. But some destinations choose their own visitors, and some journeys end in places that don't appear on any map. On the morning of July 15, 1989, the Wallace family loaded their blue Chevrolet Suburban with enough supplies for a week-long stay. Richard, ever the engineer, had created a checklist that covered everything from first aid supplies to entertainment for the twins. Susan packed her famous chocolate chip cookies and enough ingredients to make s'mores around the campfire. Jennifer brought her camera, determined to document their first real family vacation in years. Michael loaded his telescope and a star chart, excited about the dark skies he'd have for astronomical observation. They left their house at exactly 6:30 a.m., a time Richard had calculated would get them to the cabin by mid-afternoon while avoiding the worst of the desert heat. Their neighbor, Carlos Martinez, was watering his lawn when they pulled out of the garage. He waved and called out, "Have a great time. See you next week." It was the last confirmed sighting of the Wallace family in our reality. The drive to Whisper Canyon should have taken 3 hours and 47 minutes, according to Richard's meticulous calculations. The route was straightforward, Interstate 10 north to Highway 77, then a series of well-marked forest roads leading into the mountains. Richard had driven the route twice before, always alone, to scout the location and ensure it would be suitable for his family. He'd even photographed key landmarks and intersections, creating a visual guide that he kept in the glove compartment. But sometimes the roads we think we know lead to places we never intended to go. The first sign that something was wrong came on Sunday evening, July 23rd, when the Wallace family failed to return home as planned. Richard was fanatically punctual, the type of man who arrived 15 minutes early for everything and became genuinely distressed if he was even 5 minutes late. Susan had left detailed care instructions for their neighbor to feed their cat, Whiskers, with enough food to last until Monday morning, just in case. Jennifer had promised to call her best friend, Amy, first thing Monday morning to share stories and photos from the trip. Michael had assured his summer job supervisor that he would definitely be at work Tuesday morning. These weren't casual promises. They were commitments made by responsible people who understood that others were counting on them. When Monday came and went with no word, when Tuesday arrived with Michael absent from work and Jennifer's phone calls going unanswered, their extended network of family and friends knew something was terribly wrong. Carlos Martinez was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. On Tuesday evening, he knocked on the Wallace house door, concerned about the overflowing mailbox and the fact that Whiskers was crying constantly from inside. When no one answered, he used the spare key Susan had given him for emergencies and found the house exactly as the family had left it. Beds made, dishes washed, everything in perfect order, except for one detail that would later prove significant: Richard's study. Usually meticulously organized, showed signs of hasty activity. Maps were scattered across his desk, and his normally precise filing system was disturbed. The Tucson Police Department treated the Wallace disappearance as a high-priority case from the moment it was reported. Detective David Hernandez, a 20-year veteran who had worked everything from domestic disputes to gang violence, was assigned as lead investigator. In 2 decades of police work, he told me during our interview last month, I'd never encountered anything like this. Entire families don't just evaporate, especially families like the Wallaces. There's always evidence, always a trail, always something left behind. But this case, it was like they had never existed. The first search team departed for Whisper Canyon on Wednesday, July 26th, armed with detailed maps, emergency supplies, and communication equipment. The drive to the canyon took exactly the time Richard had calculated, following his meticulously planned route without incident. They found the cabin precisely where it should be, accessible by the same road Richard had traveled twice before. The building was locked, but Richard had hidden the key exactly where the owner had specified, under a loose stone beside the front steps. Inside, the scene was both normal and deeply disturbing. The cabin appeared to have been occupied recently, but not by people preparing to leave. Beds were made with hospital corner precision that matched Richard's military background. Susan's toiletries were arranged on the bathroom counter with the obsessive order she was known for. The twins' belongings were unpacked and organized in their shared bedroom, clothes folded and placed in drawers as if they planned to stay for weeks rather than days. But it was the kitchen that provided the most puzzling evidence. Fresh food in the refrigerator, a partially used loaf of bread on the counter, and dirty dishes in the sink that suggested the family had eaten a meal shortly before. What? Before they vanished into thin air? What investigators found outside the cabin was even more baffling. The blue Suburban was gone, along with the car keys, but there were no tire tracks leading away from the parking area. The ground around the cabin was soft sand and loose dirt that should have clearly shown vehicle movement, but the investigators found no evidence that a car had been moved recently. Even more puzzling, they discovered 4 sets of footprints leading away from the cabin toward the canyon's rim, but the prints ended abruptly at the edge, as if the family had simply walked off the cliff. Rappelling teams were immediately deployed to search the canyon floor, a dangerous operation given the smooth rock walls and 200-foot drop. They found no bodies, no clothing, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had ever fallen or climbed down. The canyon floor was covered with centuries of accumulated sand and debris, undisturbed except by wind and weather. Helicopter searches expanded the search radius to 50 miles, using thermal imaging equipment to detect any sign of human presence in the vast wilderness. Search dogs, brought in from Phoenix, lost the family's scent at the exact same spot where the footprints ended. Even bloodhounds, renowned for their ability to track scents across miles of terrain, became agitated and refused to continue beyond the canyon's edge. "I've never seen anything like it," the lead dog handler told investigators. "It's like their scent just stops existing at that point. The dogs act like they've hit an invisible wall." Over the following 6 weeks, the search grew to involve over 200 volunteers, multiple helicopter crews, mounted search teams, and specialized cave rescue units. Every accessible cave, crevice, and hidden valley within a 100-mile radius was thoroughly explored. The search became one of the largest missing persons operations in Arizona history, drawing national media attention and inspiring dozens of amateur sleuths to join the effort. The FBI became involved when the local investigation stalled, treating the case as a possible kidnapping, despite the lack of ransom demands or evidence of foul play. Special Agent Sandra Morrison, a specialist in missing persons cases, arrived from the Phoenix field office with a team of forensic analysts and behavioral specialists. "What struck me immediately," Agent Morrison recalled during our phone conversation, "was how normal everything seemed. Normal family, normal vacation plans, normal destination. But normal families don't disappear without leaving some kind of trail. There's always something. Abandoned clothing, evidence of struggle, witness sightings, financial activity. The complete absence of any evidence was in itself evidence that something extraordinary had occurred. The FBI's investigation revealed that the Wallace family had no enemies, no significant debts, no history of mental illness or substance abuse, no connections to criminal organizations. Richard's work as a civil engineer involved routine municipal projects, water treatment plants, highway overpasses, parking garages. Susan's teaching career was exemplary, with no disciplinary actions or complaints from parents. The twins were honor students with clean disciplinary records and no involvement with drugs or dangerous activities. Financial records showed a stable middle-class family with no unusual transactions or hidden accounts. Medical records revealed no serious illnesses or prescription medications that might explain altered behavior. Phone records from the weeks before their disappearance showed only routine calls to family members, friends, and service providers. The FBI's psychological profile of the family concluded that they were exceptionally low risk for voluntary disappearance and highly unlikely to have engaged in any activity that would result in harm to themselves or others. Yet despite 6 months of intensive investigation using every resource available to federal law enforcement, the FBI found no evidence to explain what had happened to the Wallace family. The first break in the case came in March 1990, 8 months after the disappearance, when a park ranger at Saguaro National Park reported an encounter that defied explanation. Ranger Thomas Blackfoot was conducting a routine patrol of the park's backcountry area when he spotted 4 people hiking in an area that required special permits that no one had requested for that day. When he approached to check their authorization, he immediately recognized them as the missing Wallace family from the photographs that had been distributed to all park personnel. But something was wrong with the encounter from the beginning. The family appeared to be wearing the same clothes they had been wearing when they disappeared, but the clothing showed no signs of wear, despite 8 months in the Arizona wilderness. Their skin was pale, as if they hadn't been exposed to the intense desert sun. Most disturbing was their behavior. They seemed confused about where they were and what day it was. When Ranger Blackfoot asked how they had survived 8 months in the desert, Richard Wallace looked at him with genuine puzzlement and said, "8 months? We've only been walking for a few hours. We're just trying to find our car." Susan complained that they had gotten turned around after leaving the cabin this morning to take a short hike. The twins appeared dazed and kept asking why it was getting dark when they had started their walk at noon. Ranger Blackfoot radioed for backup and tried to keep the family calm while help arrived, but within minutes of making the radio call, something unprecedented occurred. The family simply began to fade, becoming translucent and then completely invisible, like ghosts dissolving in sunlight. Blackfoot was left standing alone in the desert, questioning his own sanity, with only the lingering scent of Susan's lavender perfume as evidence that the encounter had actually happened. This sighting was the first of many reported encounters with the Wallace family over the following years, each more impossible than the last. In June 1991, a gas station attendant in Sedona claimed that the family had stopped for fuel, paying with exact change and asking for directions to the road that goes back to before. The attendant, Maria Santos, described them as seeming lost and confused, constantly checking their watches as if time wasn't working properly for them. She said Richard kept asking what year it was, and when she told him it was 1991, he insisted she was wrong because they had left for vacation just yesterday in 1989. Security camera footage from the gas station showed the time period Maria described, but the tape revealed only empty space where she claimed the family had been standing. In September 1992, a family camping at Lake Powell reported sharing their campfire with 4 people who perfectly matched the Wallace description. The campers, the Henderson family from Colorado, said the Wallaces had appeared at their campsite around sunset, carrying no camping gear and wearing clothes that seemed wrong for the season. They sat around the fire for hours, speaking rarely and staring into the flames, as if searching for something hidden in the light. When dawn broke, the Henderson family found themselves alone, with no footprints or other evidence that anyone had shared their camp. Most bizarrely, their digital camera, which had been taking automatic time-lapse photos throughout the night to capture the stars, showed only the Henderson family in every image, despite their clear memories of conversations with the missing family. These encounters followed a pattern that would become familiar. The Wallaces would appear unexpectedly, seem confused about time and location, interact briefly with witnesses, then vanish without explanation, often leaving behind only the faintest traces of their presence. The scientific community began paying attention to the Wallace case in 1993 when Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist from the University of Arizona, read about the mounting reports of impossible encounters and decided to investigate. Dr. Vasquez specialized in temporal mechanics and had been researching theoretical concepts related to time dilation and dimensional intersections. The Wallace case presented patterns that were consistent with certain theoretical models I had been working on, she explained during our recent interview. If parallel dimensions or alternate timelines could occasionally intersect with our reality, the resulting phenomena would look exactly like what witnesses were describing. Her initial investigation focused on the geographical locations where sightings had occurred, and she quickly discovered that they formed a perfect spiral pattern centered on Whisper Canyon. Using electromagnetic field detectors, she found unusual energy readings at each sighting location, readings that suggested the presence of forces unknown to conventional physics. In 1994, Dr. Vasquez received permission to conduct a comprehensive study of Whisper Canyon itself, bringing a team of graduate students and sophisticated scientific equipment to the site of the original disappearance. What they discovered challenged everything the scientific establishment believed about the nature of reality. The canyon showed consistent electromagnetic anomalies that couldn't be explained by known geological phenomena. Gravity readings fluctuated unpredictably, sometimes showing areas where objects weighed measurably more or less than they should. Most remarkably, atomic clocks placed in specific locations within the canyon ran at different rates, some fast and some slow, compared to synchronized timepieces just yards away. We documented over 40 instances of temporal distortion, Dr. Vasquez told me. Time itself seemed to behave differently in Whisper Canyon, flowing at various rates depending on location and seemingly arbitrary factors we couldn't identify. Dr. Vasquez's research team also documented photographic anomalies that defied explanation. Cameras would occasionally capture images of people and objects that weren't visible to the naked eye, including several photographs that clearly showed the Wallace family in various locations around the canyon. In one particularly disturbing image, the family appeared to be waving at the camera, but they looked older. Richard's hair had gone grey, Susan showed signs of aging, and the twins appeared to be in their 20s rather than teenagers. Written on the back of this photograph, in handwriting that matched samples from Richard's engineering notebooks, were the words, "We can see you, but you can't see us. Still trying to come home." Carbon dating of the photograph paper returned impossible results, suggesting it had been created both decades in the past and years in the future. Spectrographic analysis revealed that the image contained elements that shouldn't exist in normal photography, including light wavelengths that don't occur naturally on Earth. When Dr. Vasquez attempted to publish her findings in mainstream scientific journals, she was met with skepticism and ridicule from the academic community. Peer reviewers dismissed her work as science fiction masquerading as research and suggested she was either delusional or attempting to perpetrate an elaborate hoax. Undeterred, she continued her research privately, eventually discovering that Whisper Canyon was not unique. Similar temporal anomalies existed at dozens of locations across the American Southwest, many of which had histories of unexplained disappearances dating back over a century. What we found suggests that our understanding of reality is fundamentally incomplete, she concluded. There are places on Earth where the normal rules simply don't apply, where the boundaries between dimensions become permeable, allowing people to slip through into realities we can't even imagine. The breakthrough came in 1995 when ground-penetrating radar revealed the existence of massive underground structures beneath Whisper Canyon. The radar images showed a network of tunnels, chambers, and geometric formations that extended for miles beneath the surface, far too complex and sophisticated to be natural cave systems. The central chamber, located directly beneath the spot where the Wallace cabin had stood, was roughly the size of an aircraft hangar and appeared to have perfectly smooth walls that reflected radar signals in ways that suggested they were composed of an unknown material. Smaller chambers connected to the main space through tunnels that formed intricate geometric patterns, circles, hexagons, and spirals that seemed to follow mathematical principles not yet understood by human science. When drilling equipment was brought in to investigate these underground anomalies, every attempt to reach the chambers failed in identical ways. Drill bits would function normally until reaching a depth of exactly 127 feet, at which point they would simply stop as if encountering an impenetrable barrier. The drilling equipment showed no signs of mechanical failure, and the bits weren't damaged or dulled. They just couldn't penetrate further, as if they had hit an invisible wall that existed in three-dimensional space, but not in any physical sense that engineers could comprehend. Seismic studies revealed that the underground network extended far beyond Whisper Canyon, connecting to similar formations beneath other locations where unexplained disappearances had occurred throughout Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Southern California. The pattern suggested a vast underground system that spanned hundreds of miles, possibly thousands, with Whisper Canyon serving as a major hub or intersection point. "We weren't looking at a single anomaly," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the geologist who led the underground mapping project. "We were looking at evidence of something that challenged our basic understanding of how the Earth's subsurface is supposed to work. These formations shouldn't exist, but they're definitely there, and they're definitely connected to the disappearances." The connection between the underground formations and missing persons cases became undeniable when researchers mapped every unexplained disappearance in the Southwest over the past century. The pattern was startling. 127 documented cases of individuals or families vanishing without explanation, and every single disappearance had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the underground anomalies. The earliest recorded case dated back to 1887, when the entire population of a small mining town called Perdition Wells, 37 people, vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty buildings and a cryptic message carved into the town's church door: "Gone below to find the way between." In 1923, the Henderson family of 4 disappeared while camping near Meteor Crater, only to have their car discovered 8 years later, sitting in the center of the crater with no tire tracks leading to it, and fresh groceries in the back seat, dated the day before the discovery. The Morrison family vanished from their ranch in 1956, but neighbors continued to see lights in their farmhouse windows for years afterward, despite the fact that the electricity had been disconnected and the building had been thoroughly searched multiple times. Each case followed the same pattern. Normal people engaged in routine activities would simply cease to exist in our reality, occasionally reappearing years later in circumstances that defied logical explanation. What we realized, Dr. Chen told me is that we weren't dealing with isolated incidents. We were looking at evidence of a phenomenon that had been occurring consistently for over a century, possibly much longer. The underground formations weren't just geological anomalies. They were some kind of interface, for lack of a better word, a place where our reality intersects with something else. The implications were staggering. If the research was correct, there were locations on Earth where the normal laws of physics didn't apply, where people could accidentally step from one dimension into another, where time itself could become unstable and unreliable. The truth behind Whisper Canyon and the underground formations finally began to emerge in 1996, when an elderly Hopi medicine man named Joseph Crowfeather decided to break centuries of tribal silence about what his people called the crossing places. Joseph was dying of cancer and felt that the time had come to share knowledge that his ancestors had protected for generations, especially as more people continued to disappear in areas his tribe had long considered dangerous. My grandfather's grandfather knew about these places, Joseph told me during our meeting on the reservation. They have existed since the beginning of the world, since the time when the boundaries between realities were first drawn. They are doorways, passages between the world we know and the worlds we cannot see, but they are also traps for those who enter them without understanding. According to Hopi tradition, the underground formations weren't built by any human civilization. They were natural intersections where multiple dimensions of reality converged, created by forces that existed before the Earth itself took its current form. The geometric patterns detected by radar weren't random. They formed a kind of navigation system, a three-dimensional map that allowed entities to move between different planes of existence. But the crossing between dimensions came with a terrible price for living beings. When someone enters the crossing places while still alive, Joseph explained, they become caught between worlds. They exist in all realities, but belong fully to none. They can appear in our world occasionally, but they can never truly return because they no longer exist entirely in any single dimension. The fresh flowers found in the Wallace family's car, the impossible preservation of evidence, the temporal anomalies, the sightings that defied logic, everything made sense when viewed through the lens of interdimensional displacement. The Wallaces weren't dead, but they weren't alive in any way that beings confined to a single reality could understand. Joseph's revelation provided context for generations of tribal knowledge about the crossing places and the protocols his ancestors had developed for dealing with them. There are rituals that can protect travelers, ceremonies that can guide lost souls back to their proper reality, he explained. But these require knowledge that has been mostly forgotten as our people were forced to abandon the old ways. The Hopi had long maintained sacred sites near several crossing places, conducting regular ceremonies to keep the dimensional boundaries stable and prevent innocent people from accidentally stumbling into other realities. But as European settlement expanded across the Southwest and Native Americans were driven from their traditional lands, many of these protective measures had been abandoned. Without the stabilizing influence of the tribal ceremonies, the crossing places had become increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The white man's roads and buildings have disturbed the natural balance, Joseph said sadly. The crossings that once occurred only during specific times and under certain conditions now happen randomly, without warning. More people are being lost because the old protections are no longer maintained. He described the Wallace family as victims of this disruption, innocents who had unknowingly entered a crossing place during a period of dimensional instability. They were now existing in what he called the dreaming lands, a space between realities where consciousness could persist, but physical existence became fluid and uncertain. Time moves differently there, he explained. What feels like days to them might be years to us, or the reverse. They are still trying to return home, but the path they took no longer exists in any single reality. They are lost between worlds, and each attempt to return makes them more displaced, more disconnected from the reality they once knew. The case took an even more disturbing turn in 1997 when Frank Morrison, a 67-year-old rancher, discovered the Wallace family's blue Suburban in the dried bed of Copper Creek, 40 miles northeast of Whisper Canyon. 8 years of severe drought had reduced the creek to nothing but sand and stones, exposing objects that had been underwater for nearly a decade. But the discovery of the car raised more questions than it answered, because according to every law of physics and common sense, it should not have been there. The Suburban was sitting upright in what had been the deepest part of the creek, completely intact with no visible damage. There were no access roads to the location, no tire tracks leading to the car, no evidence of how a 5,000-pound vehicle could have been transported to that spot without leaving traces. More impossibly, the car's interior showed no signs of water damage, despite having been submerged for 8 years. The upholstery was clean and dry, the electronics showed minimal corrosion, and sitting on the dashboard was Richard's laminated map of the region, perfectly preserved and marked with a red X at coordinates that didn't correspond to any known location. In the glove compartment, investigators found something that defied all explanation. 4 freshly picked wildflowers, still damp with morning dew, still vibrant with color, as if they had been placed there hours rather than years before. Botanical analysis identified them as a species native to the high mountains that bloomed only during a 2-week period in late spring, meaning someone had picked them during a season when the creek still had water and placed them in a car that shouldn't have existed in our reality. The forensic analysis of the Suburban revealed anomalies that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of matter and time. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the car returned wildly inconsistent results. Some samples appeared to be only weeks old, while others seemed to be centuries old, despite being collected from the same location. The car's odometer showed exactly 847 additional miles beyond what it had registered when the family left Tucson, precisely the distance to Whisper Canyon and back, plus approximately 50 extra miles that couldn't be accounted for. Soil samples from beneath the vehicle revealed geological layers that shouldn't have existed at that location, including minerals that weren't native to Arizona and microscopic organisms that had been extinct for thousands of years. Most disturbing of all, spectrographic analysis of the car's metal components revealed isotopic ratios that didn't match any known terrestrial sources, suggesting that the vehicle had been exposed to forms of radiation or energy that didn't exist naturally on Earth. Every piece of evidence we collected contradicted every other piece of evidence, explained Dr. Martinez, the forensic specialist who led the analysis. It was as if the car existed in multiple states simultaneously, old and new, terrestrial and extraterrestrial, present and absent. We were looking at physical matter that didn't behave according to the laws of physics as we understand them. The discovery of the Suburban also triggered a wave of new sightings and encounters with the Wallace family, as if finding their car had somehow strengthened their connection to our reality. Witnesses reported seeing them at various locations throughout Arizona, always appearing confused about where they were and what year it was, always asking for directions home to an address that no longer existed in the world they had left behind. As my investigation deepened in 1998, I began to uncover evidence of a cover-up that extended to the highest levels of government. The FBI files on the Wallace case, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, had been heavily redacted, with entire pages blacked out and whole sections classified at levels normally reserved for national security matters. When I pressed for explanations, I was told that the information had been classified to protect ongoing investigations and preserve national security interests. responses that made no sense for a missing persons case unless there were aspects of the investigation that the government didn't want public knowledge. Through contacts in the scientific community, I learned that Dr. Vasquez's research had attracted attention from a secretive Department of Defense unit that specialized in anomalous phenomena, essentially a government agency tasked with investigating events that couldn't be explained by conventional science. Dr. Vasquez told me that she had been approached by men in dark suits who claimed to represent national security interests and strongly suggested that she discontinue her research into temporal anomalies. When she refused, her government funding was quietly terminated, her graduate students were reassigned to other projects, and her access to university laboratory facilities was severely restricted. "They didn't explicitly threaten me," she said. But the message was clear. Some things are too dangerous for public knowledge. I also discovered that several other researchers who had investigated similar cases had experienced similar pressure, and some had simply disappeared from the academic world entirely, their research confiscated and their careers destroyed. The government's interest in the Wallace case became more understandable when I learned about the military's historical involvement with projects related to dimensional research and time manipulation. Declassified documents from the 1950s and 1960s revealed that both the U.S. military and intelligence agencies had conducted extensive research into what they called reality displacement phenomena, attempting to weaponize the ability to move objects and personnel between dimensions. Project Looking Glass, a classified program run jointly by the CIA and Defense Department, had specifically focused on locations like Whisper Canyon, where dimensional boundaries appeared to be unstable. The project's stated goals included developing technology to send reconnaissance teams into parallel realities, and establishing communication with alternate versions of Earth where historical events had unfolded differently. While most of the project's files remained classified, the documents I was able to access suggested that the researchers had achieved limited success in creating controlled dimensional crossings, but at a terrible cost. Numerous test subjects had become lost between realities, trapped in the same interdimensional limbo that had claimed the Wallace family. The project was officially terminated in 1969 after a catastrophic experiment that resulted in the disappearance of an entire research facility and its 47 personnel. But evidence suggested that the work had continued under different names and deeper levels of classification. "The government knows exactly what happened to families like the Wallaces," a former intelligence analyst told me during a clandestine meeting in Phoenix. "They've been studying these phenomena for decades, trying to figure out how to control them. But some forces are too powerful and unpredictable for human manipulation. The crossing places exist according to their own rules, and anyone who enters them becomes subject to laws of physics that we don't understand." My investigation took a personal turn in 1999 when I experienced my own encounter with the Wallace family during a late-night visit to Whisper Canyon. I had driven to the location hoping to conduct electromagnetic readings with new equipment Dr. Vasquez had helped me obtain, planning to spend the night monitoring for any unusual activity. Around 3 a.m., as I sat in my car calibrating the instruments, the temperature suddenly dropped by 30 degrees, and the electromagnetic readings spiked beyond anything I had previously recorded. Through the windshield, I saw 4 figures approaching my car from the direction of where the cabin had once stood. Even in the darkness, I immediately recognized them as the Wallace family from the hundreds of photographs I had studied during my investigation. But something was profoundly wrong with their appearance. They seemed translucent, as if they were made of moonlight and shadow rather than flesh and blood. Richard was in the lead, wearing the same hiking clothes witnesses had described from 1989, but his face was lined with an exhaustion that seemed to go beyond physical tiredness. Susan walked beside him, her eyes scanning the landscape as if she didn't recognize surroundings that should have been familiar. Jennifer and Michael followed behind their parents, moving with the uncertain gait of people walking in a dream. When they reached my car, Richard tapped on the driver's side window with fingers that made no sound against the glass. I rolled down the window, my heart pounding, and he leaned down to speak to me in a voice that seemed to come from very far away. "Excuse me," Richard said, his words echoing strangely in the still air. "But we seem to be lost. We were staying at a cabin around here, but we can't seem to find our car. Could you tell us what time it is?" I looked at my watch and told him it was just after 3 a.m., but when I looked up to gauge his reaction, confusion clouded his features. "That can't be right," he said, turning to Susan. "We only left the cabin a few minutes ago to look at the stars. It was barely sunset." Susan stepped closer to the car, and I could see through her as if she were made of mist. "What year is it?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of desperate hope. When I told her it was 1999, she staggered backward as if I had struck her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We just got here yesterday. It's 1989. We're on vacation with the kids." Jennifer and Michael remained silent, staring at me with eyes that seemed to reflect depths of experience no teenagers should possess. "We keep trying to go home," Jennifer finally said, her voice barely audible. "But home isn't where we left it. The roads all lead to different places now, and our house is full of strangers who don't know us." Michael nodded and added, "Sometimes we can see our old life like watching a movie through a window, but we can't get back inside. We can't make anyone hear us or see us except sometimes like now." As dawn began to break over the canyon, the family started to fade, becoming more translucent with each passing moment. "Please," Richard called out as they disappeared, "if you find our car, tell them we're still trying to come home. Tell them we never meant to leave." And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the desert with only the lingering scent of lavender perfume and the overwhelming certainty that I had just witnessed something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality. That encounter changed the entire focus of my investigation. No longer was I simply researching a missing persons case. I was documenting evidence of dimensional displacement, studying a phenomenon that suggested our universe was far more complex and dangerous than mainstream science admitted. Over the following months, I interviewed dozens of other witnesses who had encountered the Wallace family or similar displaced individuals, and I began to see patterns that painted a terrifying picture of reality. The missing weren't simply dead. They were trapped in a state of existence between dimensions, conscious and aware, but unable to return to the reality they had left behind. They retained their memories and personalities, but existed in a form that was neither fully alive nor completely dead, caught in an eternal loop of searching for a home that had moved beyond their reach. Some witnesses reported that the displaced individuals seemed to age differently, sometimes appearing older or younger than they should be, as if time flowed at different rates in their interdimensional prison. Others noted that the missing seemed to have knowledge of events that hadn't yet occurred in our timeline, suggesting that they could perceive multiple versions of reality simultaneously. Most disturbing were reports that some of the displaced were beginning to change, their humanity slowly eroding as they spent more time between dimensions, becoming something other than human, something adapted to existence in the spaces between realities. The implications of what I had discovered were staggering. If my research was correct, there were potentially thousands of people trapped in interdimensional limbo, lost souls wandering between realities, and occasionally breaking through into our world, just long enough to remind us of their existence. The crossing places weren't just geographical anomalies, they were cosmic wounds, tears in the fabric of reality that allowed beings to slip from one dimension to another but offered no reliable way back. And they were growing. According to Dr. Vasquez's updated research, the dimensional instabilities were becoming more frequent and more unpredictable, possibly due to human activity that was disrupting the natural balance that had kept the crossing places stable for millennia. Climate change, underground mining, nuclear testing, even the electromagnetic pollution from modern technology. All of these factors seem to be contributing to an acceleration of dimensional displacement events. We're approaching a tipping point, Dr. Vasquez warned me during our final interview. If the crossing places become completely unstable, we could see massive displacement events, entire cities disappearing into other dimensions, millions of people lost between realities. The Wallace family was just the beginning. They're harbingers of something much larger and more terrifying that's coming. But despite the mounting evidence and the growing frequency of displacement events, the government continued its policy of denial and cover-up, classifying research, discrediting witnesses, and maintaining the fiction that such phenomena were impossible. The truth was too dangerous for public knowledge, too threatening to the comfortable illusion that reality was stable and predictable. As I conclude this investigation in 2005, 16 years after the Wallace family first disappeared, I find myself haunted by questions that may never be answered. Are Richard, Susan, Jennifer, and Michael still out there somewhere, trapped in a reality that exists parallel to our own? Do they continue to age and change, or are they frozen in the moment of their displacement, eternally seeking a way back to a world that has moved on without them? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many others have suffered the same fate, vanishing into the spaces between dimensions, while the rest of us continue our lives, oblivious to the cosmic horror that lurks in places like Whisper Canyon? The government knows the truth, but chooses to hide it. Scientists who investigate these phenomena find their careers destroyed. Witnesses are dismissed as delusional or attention-seeking. And meanwhile, the crossing places continue to claim victims, families and individuals who make the mistake of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, when the boundaries between realities become permeable. The Wallace family's story isn't unique. It's just one of many similar cases that have been hidden from public view, buried under layers of classification and official denial. But the truth has a way of surfacing, despite all attempts to suppress it. The evidence is there for anyone brave enough to look. The government documents that slip through classification cracks, the scientific research that challenges conventional wisdom, the witness testimonies that describe impossible encounters with impossible people. We live in a universe that is far stranger and more dangerous than we want to admit. A reality where the normal laws of physics can break down in certain locations, where people can slip through cracks in existence and become lost between dimensions. The Wallace family found one of those cracks during what should have been a simple vacation, and they've been paying the price ever since. Trapped in an existence that is neither life nor death, but something infinitely worse, an eternal search for a home that they can see but never reach. A family forever lost in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the reality we know and the realities we cannot imagine. Their story is a warning that some places on Earth are not meant for human habitation, some doors are not meant to be opened, and some vacations end not with a return home, but with a journey into dimensions where the very concept of home ceases to have meaning. And if you think this is just another urban legend, another piece of internet folklore designed to give you chills, I urge you to remember this. The next time you're traveling through remote areas of the American Southwest, pay attention to places that feel wrong, locations where the air seems thicker and time moves differently, canyons where the silence is too complete and the shadows fall at impossible angles. These might be crossing places, dimensional weak points where reality becomes unstable. And if you ever find yourself in such a location, if you ever see four figures in the distance who look like they're searching for something they'll never find, if you ever hear voices calling for help from directions where no one should be, remember the Wallace family and turn around. Walk away. Drive away as fast as you can. Because some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some disappearances are permanent, and some families are destined to wander forever in the spaces between worlds, calling out to a reality that can no longer hear their voices or welcome them home.